Hello everybody and welcome to the Manchester and North West districts and sections branch of IOSH. Great to see you. Thank you all for turning up, those from Manchester, and a special warm welcome to those who are joining us from further afield. We've had attendees from Hong Kong and the Caribbean in the past and further afield. So really thank you and a warm welcome. This is part two of a 4-part series of webinars that we put together. It was a concept idea that came out of last year. And once I'd spoken to Rebecca, and she brought Rachel on board, and they have put together what I find is a fascinating series of presentations for you about self-awareness and everything that revolves around that. So a warm welcome to Rebecca and Rachel, and I'll let them carry on with the part two of our webinar.
Thanks, Stuart. So welcome everyone. So my name's Rebecca and my colleague is Rachel. We'll introduce ourselves a little bit fuller in a minute, but this is part two. We're going to look at the impact of language and communication, because people will forget what you said or what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So this is why language is important. So in terms of myself, I'm a business psychologist and a coach. Principally, I help business owners and leaders understand and develop themselves, their people, to deliver an engaged and performing organisation. And I hand over to Rachel, who'll introduce herself before I take you through the agenda.
Okay, hi, I'm Rachel. I'm an executive coach, consultant and facilitator. I joined IOSH back in 2002, which is a really long time ago. I qualified as a coach in 2014. And my coaching focus is around leadership authenticity, and it's linked to leadership resilience and overall well-being. I use coaching to improve levels of care and compassion in organisations, as well as engagement and performance.
Thanks, Rachel. So, as Stuart said, it's part of a series. We spoke in October about developing your self-awareness. The next one's going to be around having coaching conversations, and finally around behavioural modification tactics or behavioural change. Very much, if you want to see the one previous, you can just go onto the IOSH YouTube channel. This one is obviously being recorded as well, and you'll see the others. They do stand alone, however, so if you can only make one, or you're only interested in one, then you're very welcome just to see that one. It will make sense on its own, but hopefully you'll find the whole sequence useful. And it really is about how to improve your personal impact as a health and safety champion. This has been very bespoke to yourselves as an audience. So in terms of the agenda today, we're going to look at what we say and why, how we say it and why that matters. We're going to look at our internal and external dialogues. We're going to look a little bit at personality and communication styles. We're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at ego states and how they influence. And then we're going to look a little bit at authority and trust. And we do pause as we go along with some reflection exercises. So hopefully you've got a pen and paper handy. When we get to the reflection exercises, we will stop talking at that point and give you 2 minutes of thinking time, just to actually try and translate some of the messages that you're hearing into learning for you. We feel that it's really important to build it into the time, so you don't have to then find lots of time afterwards to do that reflective practice. We are also going to be using Mentimeter today. We're going to come out of the screen and go into the Mentimeter when that's appropriate, with just 2 polls as we go along. Hopefully the technology gods are with us today, so we'll see how that goes. So just a recap and a reminder for those of you who did see it, self-awareness is important because it helps us understand our impact on other people. So the first part of impact is what's going on for me. It helps us gain that accurate understanding. And we looked at 2 different models. We looked at the Johari's window model, which is around trying to increase what we know about ourselves. And we looked at Kolb's learning cycle in terms of that reflection, theorizing and experimenting. So we're doing a bit of that today. We also looked a bit at SCARF, and I will recap on that in a minute because that's important for language and why it's important to look at self-awareness. So where do we start? Why does language matter? Well, principally, I wanted to take you back to some aspects that we talk about a lot about, which is in terms of our evolution. And I wanted to share with you some new slides that I'd seen from Hilary Scarlett. She's a neuroscientist, big leader in this field. And because of MRI machines, they can now actually look at how our brain responds to threat or non-threats. And you can see on the left-hand side, what you have here are the areas of the brain that are activated when there is a threat. So you can see that's a tarantula being closer to the foot. That's what they're trying to illustrate there. Apologies for people who've got spider phobias. On the right-hand side is what the brain looks like when the threat is going away. So you can see the parts of the brain that's activated is different. So what is going on here? The brain is a huge source of energy. It takes a lot of energy considering its weight. It's only 2% of our weight, I think, but it takes 20% of our energy. So what it needs when it sees a threat, it's wired to tune into, is that a threat to me? Is this a survival threat? Unfortunately, because our evolution is a little bit slower than how we socially evolve, our brain sees social threats the same as it sees physical threats. So if someone's saying something that makes you feel threatened, it triggers the same kind of activity as them actually coming at you with something that's threatening. Hopefully that makes sense in terms of why it's important. So I'll take you through just a little bit about SCARF. I know some of you will have seen this already, but these are things that can trigger you socially. So status, for example. So if someone said to you, actually your view doesn't matter in this situation, that triggers a reaction. That's a threat. Your brain will see that as a threat. Certainty, lots of uncertainty at the moment. So comments such as, well, actually, I can't give you clarity about your role in that. We don't know. That will be seen as a threat by your brain. Autonomy, well, just do what I ask you to do. You know, don't choose for yourself. So that's seen as a threat. Relatedness, we're very, very social beings, as you will all be experiencing that isolation around that. All team meetings are cancelled. Like, oh, so that really impacts, that triggers as well. And then finally, fairness, a big thing about fairness. Well, she can have a say, but you can't. That is a threat as well. So this is why you need to start paying attention to why words matter.
Your Mentimeter.
Mentimeter. We're going to do Mentimeter. Let's have a look. So, bring this up. So in the chat, you should be able to see a code. It's also at the top of the slides. I go full screen on this. So what words trigger negative feeling in you when someone asks you to do something? Just take a little think about what words trigger you. So I've talked a little bit about SCARF and people telling you what to do, people not giving you a choice. What words actually trigger you? And we'll just give people a chance to reflect on that, and then we'll have a look at a little word cloud, all being well with the tech. So the kind of things for me is definitely when someone says, can I have a word? When someone says, can I have a word? I have a little panic and think, what do they mean? What do they want to know? What have I done wrong? So that's a big one for me. What kind of words tend to trigger you, Rachel?
Should and must are big ones for me. So I guess the should, there's a real judgment there.
Yeah.
That was sort of laden behind that word. And I think must is again, it's that lack of choice and that sort of, you know, being told and forced to do things that you might be a bit reluctant to do.
Yeah, yeah. And tell is another one for me. So I had an email this morning, tell me who turned up. Really abrupt email. Just, there wasn't even like, hi Rebecca, dear Rebecca, please. It was tell me who turned up. And it really triggered. And then I thought, well, that's a bit daft. Why did that just trigger? All they really want to know is who turned up to the meeting. But it triggered. It was just the way it was really negatively worded. Okay, we can see them coming in here. So let's take a look at what's coming through. So you can see these words, a must, definite, big one there, must. Now, urgently, hate that one. By whose level, whose priority, who's it urgent for? Mine, you? Some popular ones. That's Donald Trump, I like that. That is a trigger. Yeah. No greetings, absolutely. Anything else for you, Rachel, that you can see on this word cloud that you'd like to comment on?
I think, again, something you just picked on, which is this is urgent, and thinking, well, actually, who is it urgent for? And again, there's something that has a response in me that feels like I'm being forced to do something that I might not want to do, either now or in the future. So I think, yeah, there's quite a lot of that. Do it is another one. Yeah, you must, should, now, deadline.
Okay. Well, let's close that. We'll come back to mental beta in a bit, but we're going to come back to some more content and use that later on.
So on the back of that exercise that we've just done, there was a number of words that came up that we all have in common. And I guess what we're trying to show is that the words that we use and the way that we use them really, really matter. And that the most, even some small words like must and should can have real power attached to them. And they're linked to the kind of emotional responses that we have to those words. And the danger with them is they're very kind of tightly knitted into our values and beliefs systems. So this is very much how we see ourselves, and it's very much how we see ourselves in the world. And although we will probably share quite a lot of those values and beliefs, there are always going to be differences in there based on our life experience, and again, how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves within this world. So the danger is that although the word might mean something for me, coming from my beliefs and my value systems, that might be interpreted something completely different by whoever's sort of receiving that kind of message. I'd like to say that actually the power can be both positive and it can be both negative. They can be out there for all to see. So if we think about the labels that are used and misused, and they also are behind some of those loaded kind of words and phrases that we've just kind of identified and talked through in that exercise. So it'd be really good if you could just have a think about what are the words that provoke an emotional response for you. So think about one that provokes a really positive response, and think about one that provokes a really negative response. And then think about how often do these words come up in your internal conversations. So this is about how you talk to yourself. And do any of those then kind of leak out into your external communications with others? And then think about what the impact of those kind of things are as well. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so hopefully you've got an idea about what some of these words are for you, some of these trigger words, and also about what the impact they have on both when you're talking to yourself and these words come up, but also the impact of, when they sort of come into your external dialogue and you're talking to other people. So knowing that they're there, what now can you start to do about these kind of things? So most of these words have this emotional response. And I guess what they could do is they can cause some kind of barrier to moving forwards. So if our initial dialogue is around, you must do this, or I must do this. Okay, so what do we do with that? And I guess what we can do is, are there different words that we can use? So we can shift our association with that statement. So, God, I really must do the ironing this evening. which is something I absolutely hate doing, to I want to do the ironing this evening, because if I do it this evening, I don't have to do it over the weekend. And just changing that word of must to want to can help our actual emotional response around that task. Statements like, it's just too complicated, you know, that implies that's a kind of fatalistic, finalistic kind of statement. Being able to shift that and change some of those words around and making the statements like, this feels really complicated at the moment, but how can we simplify it? It allows that kind of recognition that yes, it's feeling complicated, but that there is a choice and there's an option. It doesn't have to kind of stop there. And then this one around this kind of judgment labeled of, you know, you should have done this. And again, what we could do is bringing in some of this kind of compassionate language, and that's okay. It's recognizing, okay, you know, the world's still turning, we're still here, and about being kind to ourselves and others. So when you've seen somebody who is going through this process, or they're talking to you, and there's lots of shoulds in there, you know, it gives you a real insight into how their internal dialogue is working with them at the moment in not a particularly constructive way. So being able to sort of reach out and say, and that's okay, can really help break that cycle. So I'll hand you back over to Rebecca now.
So I'm going to just talk a little bit about personality very briefly, because how we're wired, what our personality is like, affects what we say as well and what we tune into. Here is a very simple personality model with the 5 traits down the left-hand side. This is a model called IOSH, which reflects most personality models can be matched to this. So for example, the trait that a lot of people are aware of is the trait of conscientiousness. So people who are high in conscientiousness are very self-disciplined, very careful. People low in conscientiousness tend to be a bit more spontaneous and flexible. So we can see there. So I'll just show you how that flows through into what people say in terms of the, on the next slide. So people who are open to new ideas and want to know what's going on, they might say, let's brainstorm. Let's have a think about all these different ideas. If they're less open, they might just say, well, let's look at the evidence, let's look at the data. And that might be the type of things they're saying. People high in conscientiousness, what's the plan? We need a plan before we do anything. People who are a bit more spontaneous, let's just go for it. Let's have a look at it. In terms of extroversion, you know, people who are high on extroversion, let's have a meeting about it. Who's having a lot of meetings at the moment? So that will be triggered by this high extroversion trait, wanting to talk about it. People low in extroversion, give me some time to think about it. Again, agreeableness, which is wanting to get along with people. I'd like to know what you all think. That's important to me. Or what you think is of less importance to me. So you can see that there's different ways that this is influencing. And neuroticism, the one that's really being triggered to a lot of people at the moment, you know, this is really stressful. Or I'm sure we'll find a solution. People are a bit more laid back. So what happens with personality is this is what often is the starting point in terms of conflict, because you've got a different driver in terms of what you're tuning into and how you say things. There's other layers on top, which is what we're going to take you through now. And but it is a principal part of miscommunication. So when we're working with people around conflict and teams, this is usually the starting point in terms of personality before we move into the skills and the beliefs type area. So let's have a think about what this looks like for you. So we'll just do a bit of a reflection exercise. Knowing yourself, what do you say that actually reflects your own personality style? And how do you adjust that when you're talking to people who are different to you? So we'll just give you a minute to have a think about that before we move on and talk a little bit more about trust and ego states. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a think about that. So I'll now hand over to Rachel, who's going to take you through ego states, which is another significant area that affects communication.
Okay, so the model I'm going to go through comes through transactional analysis. I don't know whether people are already familiar with this or not, so if you are, please bear with me. If you're not, I will try and simplify it as much as possible. It's a huge area of interest of mine. It's something I could talk to you for days about, but please don't panic. I will try and be brief and sort of concise about this stuff. So transactional analysis is a theory that was developed by Eric Berne, and it goes back to the 1950s. But it kind of outlines how we have developed, so how have we grown, and then how do we treat ourselves as a consequence of that? How do we relate and communicate with others? And it helps us find options and things we can do which enable us to change and to grow. So it's underpinned by the philosophy that people can change and that we all have a right to be in this world and to be accepted. So Berne designed this concept of ego states to help explain to us how we're made up, and also then how that makeup then impacts on how we relate to others. So these are drawn as 3 stacked circles, and they're kind of the building blocks of transactional analysis. So they categorize the ways we think, the way we feel, and the ways that we behave. And they're called parent, adult, child ego states. So if you look at the 3 circles down the left-hand side, and if we start at the top, which is the parent ego state. So this is a set of feelings, thinkings, behaviors that we've copied from our parents or our significant others when we were growing up. So when we were growing up, we took in ideas, beliefs, feelings, and behaviors from our parents and from significant others like teachers and other kind of caregivers. So you might find, for example, you have a sister like mine who is constantly telling you, oh my God, you sound just like mum. And then I sit there and think, oh my God, I sound just like mum. So we kind of inherit these kind of things because that's how we grew up. We took these kind of behaviors, we took their beliefs and value systems in, and they helped us to create what our picture of the world is as well. So when we look down to the next ego state, that's our adult ego state. And this is about our direct responses. So this is the here and now for us. So we deal with the things that are going on for today in ways, hopefully, that are not too unhealthily influenced by our past, which is our parent ego state. And I'll come on to how those two can be slightly contaminated in a minute. So when we're in our true adult state, we're able to use the best of our past learning and use that really appropriately in the present. And again, sort of detached from some of our unhelpful sort of values and belief systems. So when we're in our ego state, in our adult ego state, it means we're in a position that we can constantly update ourselves through our everyday experiences. So this, I suppose, when we go back to Kolb and our experiential learning, if we're in adult ego mode, that's when that's happening. It helps us review, it helps us change our perceptions, it helps us learn and grow in this space. And what that means is when we're in adult, is that we're able to see people for who they are rather than what we project onto them, that we're likely to ask for information than make assumptions about things. And then we have our child ego state. So this is the one at the bottom. And this is a set of behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that we replay in today's world from our own childhood. So going back to Rebecca's statement before, you know, somebody saying, can I have a word? You know, and your feeling from that might be that sink in your stomach and that thought process of, oh God, what have I done wrong? What am I going to get told off for now? And that might go back to experiences you've had when you were younger, being called to the teacher's office, or, you know, that was some of the language that your parents used when they weren't very happy with you, or you felt that you'd done something wrong that you were about to get punished for. So even though we're in our adult mode, having and hearing that statement and those words can trigger a response, and they can trigger that response from a different ego state. it can also be a really positive experience as well. So if you think about it, if you walk into somebody's house and you can just smell, cakes baking, and you hear that Christmas music going, and it can really take you back to a really positive time when you were with family, when you were happy. You can sort of smell the cakes, you can feel like you can taste the food, you can hear the chatter. It can take you to that point in time which you felt very happy, very comfortable, very joyful. So it can happen, in both a negative emotional response as well as a positive response. So what I meant before when I talked about the adult state getting corrupted, and what can happen is there are certain elements from our parent that might start to unconsciously become part of our adult state. So we may still carry around beliefs from our parents or our significant others, which are not really helpful to us. So they may be linked to things that are, I am, they are, it is, those kind of things. And they can have real limiting effects on how we treat ourselves and how we believe in ourselves, but also how we do treat and believe in others as well. And they can also, act out those kind of behaviors that we developed as children that were in response to certain kind of experiences and situations. So we might constantly feel that need to please people. We might avoid conflict if we've had a very critical parent, or we might go into the other mode, which I'll go into a moment, which is that defiant mode, which is I won't and you can't make me. So all those kind of things, both from our adult and the child and parent, can start to contaminate if those kind of beliefs and behaviors come in and start to unconsciously sort of contaminate the adult model. So in the parent and child, there are also there are dual forms with each of those. So if you think back to when you were a child and you think about I guess a relationship with a parent or a carer or a significant other. Now that relationship to you might have felt very nurturing. So you were shown care, you were shown love, and you were helped and supported. And we talk about that as a nurturing parent role. And then we have the other role, which is around a controlling or a critical parent. And this is a parent who might have been very hypercritical about everything you did. You got a sense that whatever you did was never right. It might be about reprimanding you, sort of censoring you, punishing you, and those sort of kind of negatives of just not being okay. And those in the child can respond, again, they have a dual aspect and a dual outcome from that. So you might be in your natural free child, you might remember as a child being really curious, being very excitable about things, being creative, being open to new ideas and learning, being able to make connections and love and befriend. But then on the other side, there might have been other things that came in, which led to a more adaptive child. And this is around coping strategies for, external influences. So this might have been about being guilty. This is where fear comes in for people, about being anxious, envious, prideful, or going the other way, which is about trying to please everybody to keep themselves safe in those. So this has all been very psychotherapeutic, and you probably sat there thinking, okay, well, what on earth does this mean then for communication? So according to transactional analysis, communication breakdowns happen because we're not fully present in our conversations. So instead of responding in a here and now, which is the adult state, we're unconsciously activating and communicating from different ego states, or from that heavily contaminated adult state. And this can cause conflict, negative emotions, and pain. So according to T8, there are three types of transactions, and they're complementary, they're crossed, and they're ulterior. So what you've got there on the slide are the complementary transactions. So for example, as an adult, I might come to another adult, and my purpose is to have an adult-to-adult conversation. So I might say, have you got this information or this report for me? And the adult response I'm expecting would be from the adult position, which says, yes, I've got that report, I'll get it over to you now, or no, I've not quite finished it, can you give me 5 minutes? Now that is classed as a complementary transaction, because what I've had is that I've had a need, I've expected a response, and actually the response that I've got is complementary to the response that I was expecting, if that makes sense. So you can also have reciprocal sort of complementary transactions. So from a child to a parent and a parent to a child. So an example for a child to a parent role might be, although I'm an adult, when I'm not feeling very well, I really want to be looked after. So actually I would go into more of a child mode. So this is around, I'm not feeling very well. I want somebody to look after and care for me and nurture me. So the person that I'm having that transaction with, if they can recognize that's what I'm looking for in that conversation, they're able to respond from that nurturing parent mode and, will be able to reciprocate. And again, that's a complementary transaction. The danger comes is when we get crossed communication. So what this is from an adult point of view, is that I have a request and a need, and I ask for that in an adult mode. I'm expecting a response from an adult ego state, and what I get is a response from a different ego state. So going back to the example I mentioned before, as an adult, have you got that report? I'm expecting a yes or no response, which is either yes, I've got it, I'll send it over to you, or no, I've not quite finished it yet, I'll send it over to you. But what I might get is how I've asked that might have had some of those trigger words in it, which have promoted a response from that child ego state, which is, no, I've not done it, and it's not going to be ready, and I just don't care. So that is a crossed communication. So the result of that is sort of one or two things. Either that might push you into a different ego state to respond to that, which will carry on that kind of game and will escalate that kind of game, or that conversation is closed. It's finished. So the idea in there is being able to recognize what's happened and push really, really hard to try and move that conversation back into adult mode and adult mode. So that might have been about acknowledging of what's just happened, just say, I'm sensing that, there's something that's gone on between what I've asked, and trying to get to the root of that, but bringing that back into an adult conversation. I also mentioned things about ulterior transactions, and this is from what is said isn't what we mean. So I guess, again, from an example, how this might be used in sales is the salesperson might say something like, this is very expensive and really high quality. So that they would say in an adult mode, but that might get lost in your kind of internal parent dialogue, which is, that's too expensive and you don't deserve it, which promotes you to respond from that child mode, which says, balls to that, I'm having it anyway. So all these ego states can kind of make up about how our transactions are and how we interact with each other. Providing those transactions are complementary, they will go on for as long as we need them to go on for. They will only stop when those transactions become crossed. And at that point, that's where you kind of need to invest in what's gone wrong, what's been crossed, and being able to recognize what that other person is looking for from that scenario. I hope I haven't gone on too long for that. It's a huge area of passion of mine. And I'm happy to answer any questions about it later, but I'll hand back to Rebecca.
Thanks, Rachel. And we'll have a look at that. Just keep that in mind when we look at the rest of what I'm going to take you through. So trust is something that really influences, and that will influence which ego state you choose to act in. So how well do you know them? What is their starting point? Do you know their agendas? Do you know their intention? Are they likely to have your interests and best interests of others at heart? And if you know those things, you're more likely to be choosing an adult state. And we talk about trust often as a bank account, and just to bear in mind that some people trust people. It's a scale. Some people will trust people, and it's about other people making withdrawals of that trust or building the trust. For other people, actually, they don't trust people when they first meet people. It's more about earning trust and making deposits to earn my trust. So trust can trigger where you are in that ego state. The other thing is authority. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about authority, because at this study, where we were allowed to do crazy studies in psychology before they were ethics, this is well worth going and having a look at. Milgram was trying to understand why, what was going on in World War II, and why certain Nazi officers were willing to do atrocities, even when it was logical that they shouldn't, because it's about pain. And what he discovered in his, there's a really interesting film about this study as well. He discovered that there's something called a white lab coat effect. So this is about if you are in a position of authority, or you appear to be in a position of authority, that is enough to influence people. So things like uniforms, business suits, obviously white lab coats, but appearing to be in a position of authority is enough to influence people. So just keep that in mind, because that can trigger. And it's all part of our social structure in terms of obeying authority. There are good things and bad things to this. So the good things is that we do need authority to keep us in terms of structure. It's helpful in emergency situations, but it does look very much like a directive style of communication. It can therefore be quite frequently misused and abused. And people in authority, and I'm not going to make any references here, but people in authority may not always be the expert. Think about that over the last kind of year, and they may not know that they don't know either. So it can feel really disempowering and disrespectful and excluding if it's inappropriate to the context in terms of authority. So I want you just to take a moment. We won't do 2 minutes because of timings, because we are rapidly running out of time. But I want you to take a moment to self-reflect. What do you convey? How are you conveying your authority? And how are you making sure you're actually having the right impact for the situation? You're using it in that good way, not in that bad way. And you're thinking about, is it appropriate in this situation? Because in your roles, you will have authority naturally through your job title anyway. Okay, let's also look at beliefs then. I'll move on if that's okay, Rachel. She mentioned beliefs already when she was talking about where they come from. But the reason I'm going to pause on beliefs is because of how communication can trigger these. So we've talked about authority. Authority can trigger a belief, but also when we add a layer of, if the person is in a suggestible mode and they're feeling emotional about the topic, then that can lead to a belief. Now, beliefs tend to be things that we build as a child. So it's, for example, the teacher saying to me, oh, shut up, what do you know? Shut up, what do you know? And me taking that in. And if I'm feeling quite emotional and, you know, I'm suggestible because it's the teacher, I'm like, oh yeah, what do I know? And you carry that through to adult life. And it might be, my opinion doesn't count. That's a belief I might build up over time and then look for reinforcements. The problem is when we look at how this can be triggered in communication. So for example, the employee might be, in fact, like myself, I'm in the high risk group. I'm actually really worried about being in the office. I don't want to come back unless I really have to. So they read a communication. Now, this is a pretty standard communication. As your health and safety officer, I know many of you will be feeling anxious about your return to the office. So you're trying to show a bit of empathy. I strongly advise it's very risky to do so without adhering to the following rules of, and then obviously we have the long list of rules that we're following at the moment. Any questions? Now that looks fairly innocuous, but the things and highlights are what I want to draw your attention to. Health and safety officer is an authority figure. You will be feeling anxious about your return is the emotional piece. It's risky. I'm in the high risk group. It's risky. Oh, and you're feeling suggestible as well in this environment. So just move on into what that shows in terms of triggers. So the employee might hear all those things and they might think, oh, my health doesn't matter to the company. I don't matter to the company. They don't care about me. And that might be how they're interpreting something that's actually appears quite neutral when it's first written. So there's a couple of different impacts which I really wanted to raise to you because of the consequence, really. The best case is they might go, I don't care, they don't care. I just need a job. I'll follow those rules. That's all right. The worst case is if they've already got a self-belief, which is around self-worth and low self-esteem, it might become reinforced by that type of communication. And it might be they go, oh, I don't matter, which can trigger all these things that we see in the workplace. So we see poor mental health, anxious, concerned. You obviously get those issues around sickness absence, stress-related conditions, mental health issues, the suicide risks that we're seeing currently. Certainly reduced engagement in the role and lowering performance. So I just wanted to flag why something that looks quite neutral and innocuous actually is really, really important, and how it can impact. And obviously in this situation, it can also be impacting in terms of the transactional analysis piece that Rachel raised. So I think we were going to do a little, should we do a little Mentimeter? One last one?
Yeah, why not?
This will be very brief. So what I'd love to do now, if you're willing, is have a think about communication methods. And it'd be fabulous if you're willing to share with everyone else in the audience. There's 8 methods for you to choose from. What communication approaches have you been finding most effective in your organisation's COVID-19 health and safety messages? I'd be interested to know what's coming out as most effective for you. And then we'll do a little self-reflection exercise before we wrap up. So there's a number of different ways you can do this, and communication can obviously be written, can be verbal, can be one-to-one settings, group settings. So we're interested, it can be emails, lots of emails. So let's have a So as people are entering the data, you can see what's coming up there as popular. So email updates being an effective way of messaging. Team meeting discussions. So what you've got there are both verbal and written communications complementing each other there, helping. Any reflections from you, Rachel, on this particular slide as we see people entering their thoughts?
Ooh, team meetings is just picked. Which I guess I'm quite glad to see. I mean, I certainly know emails are really good for getting mass information out, but I guess it's very difficult to gauge, if you're the sender of that email, how that's been interpreted and whether it's been understood. And I guess the thing with team meetings is the ability to actually have that kind of safe discussion space. So if you've got questions and you've got concerns, the ability to maybe talk that through either with your peers or with your line manager, I think is really kind of important. So, if you go back to, I guess, the example you were talking about before, having that email update, it feels really final. So you are coming back to the office and you will obey all of these rules, or, there's a high risk to you. Now, I'm left with that email. And although I might be having real emotional responses to that email, it's very unlikely, if that's come out from on a generalist email, that I'm going to respond to that to say, actually, I really don't understand what's in this, or I'm really upset about how that's been phrased. So there's a lot of areas where you don't get that feedback from that. One-to-one discussions, again, it's that safe space. It implies choice. So it's something we're going to be coming on to in the next section, which is about having those coaching conversations, being able to say, this is how it's feeling for me at the moment. This is where my concerns are. This is where my excitement is, or whatever. And having that kind of response to really explore those. So you feel that you're part of something, that part of the approach, part of the solution, and that your ideas matter and that you matter.
Absolutely. And yeah, hopefully you can join us on webinar 3 when we talk about that. So just take a moment to reflect about what you can be doing communication wise, and what might be, what did you say to someone who was not following a COVID restriction? What impact did that have? And what have we said today that you might take away to think about a slightly different way of doing it? So no doubt you'll have had some reflections on that. We certainly had some conversations in the creation of this around some of the government messaging and how that's been coming out and what that might be triggering in terms of that adaptive child for some people. So it's really worth kind of taking that moment to remember that, you know, there's lots of things that influence what's going on in terms of communication. So if we just move to the next slide, in terms of what we've been looking at. So what we're saying, how we say it does matter. It does matter. And that external dialogue and the words we're using, that should, that must, that influences, but actually our internal dialogue does affect us. Our personality will be affecting us. You know, do we need to know all the details of the rules, or do we just need to know the big picture of when we can go out our house or not? You know, what's our ego state? Are they triggering a parent-child type ego state in us? And for me, I get a little bit rebellious and I'm like, no, I don't actually want to rebel against this. I've got to engage my rational brain again. And authority, how is that influencing your communication? So that's what we've been taking you through today. So what we will do in the next webinar is go through coaching conversations before we then look at behavioural change at the end. But the coaching conversations very much will be building on what we've been talking about here. We're going to make it very interactive. We're going to help you really think about how you're having those conversations, building on that knowledge that we've just taken you through. I think that's about it for today. So any questions?
We have questions for you, Rachel and Rebecca. I just got to say what a fantastic session, and I'm sure there'll be lots and lots of takeaways from today. Even I've learned quite a bit. And the messaging, you know, your comments about the messaging and the government messaging, I think as well, the media messaging, the dissection and reconstruction of the messaging is completely confusing at times. So what a brilliant session, and I'm sure there'll be lots of takeaways and people have learned an awful lot from that today. So first question up is from my Vice Chair, Melissa, who's been listening intently in the background. Are there any tools to help us figure out our personality types? It's easy to say, I think I am this type, but reality could be very different.
There are lots of tools, Chris. There is a wealth of information in this area. A good one that focuses on communication, if you're wanting to understand conflict in communication, I find is the Myers-Briggs. That's I wouldn't use it for other areas, but it's very good for things like Myers-Briggs. There's also there's a free tool around which I was exploring recently, which links back to the IOSH model that I was talking about. I can send that link out through the team. Anything else you would add into that mix, Rachel, as a recommend, particularly around communication?
I suppose for me, as well as the kind of formal psychometric tests and the MBTIs, which kind of type indicates you, I suppose again it goes back to what we were talking about in our first session about becoming a little more self-aware. So you know, what kind of statements do you realize you use? So I know for a fact that when people come to me and say, I've got this great idea, I think we should run with it, you know, my immediate response is, okay, let's talk that through. Let me have a think through with you. And it's thinking, getting you to realize those kind of responses and how you respond in certain things. You know, do you like to take that time? Are you, yes, let's go. Do you seek lots of conversations with people? Are you interested in what they think to get their views before you make decisions? And I think that self-awareness piece can equally be important. Look for the phrases and the words that you use in your language. It will give you a real indication about, you know, what some of your personality traits are.
So a question for you, Rachel. Simone Rothwell asks, Rachel, can you recommend any further reading on ego states?
Yes, so there's a lot of the transactional model from Eric Byrne has been translated into so many different books. So it's a whole kind of psychotherapy on its own. If you go onto the website and just type in transactional analysis, the centre for it is in Charlton in Manchester, and they have a website. So there's lots of free reading and free resources on there if you want to go there first. and there'll also be a recommended reading list. So, and I suppose it's about how you want to apply it. So transactional can be very much useful for internal kind of therapeutic work about what do I know about myself and what am I doing and where I am. But again, it's very useful in spaces around, you know, team conflict, things around communication conflict. So it has lots of different facets, but it'll have, if you can take, Simone, if you could drop your email, if you're happy, sending that directly to me, what I can do is I will send you the website for the Manchester Transactional Centre.
That's very kind. Andrew Hotwood comment, no update seems to work as everyone seems to be apathetic. I think that's one of the problems at the moment, is people are getting fed up with over information, so they're making their own mind up.
It's emotional overload. We've got there's a condition called emotional fatigue, which when you're in this constant state of alert and constant state of threat messages, because we're not designed to have that level of chemical going around in our brain the whole time. So what's happened is we have got to the point where we're not hearing the messages anymore because it's just overload. It's just overload. So it's thinking about actually how do you move away from threat type messages to the other type of messages of what we want to move towards, because positive messages will be received well. So it's reframing it into what you want to see and how that helps, so you can engage with them emotionally and re-engage them into a not threat, that non-threat piece. So if you do this, that spider moves away, rather than don't do this because that spider comes towards you. You think about that diagram right at the beginning, it's actually trying to reframe things in positive language that people want to move towards. And that is something we're going to cover very much in webinar 4, but that's the key thing to be thinking about.
Nicola Croft asks, using this information that she's got from today's webinar, how would you suggest would be best to approach someone who are constantly ignoring COVID rules in the workplace? And she does say thank you.
Got a couple of thoughts, but Rachel, do you want to, you've got some thoughts as well there?
Sorry, I was just typing in the web address.
Oh, typing in the chat. Oh, right, yes.
So using this information, how would you suggest would be best to approach someone who is constantly ignoring COVID rules in the workplace? Thank you.
Triggering adaptive child, I would say.
Yeah, so I suppose going back to the transactional analysis piece, it's getting to the root of why people aren't doing what they're doing or being asked to do. And if it is something around, you know, do this, and you're thinking, why? Or I don't want to, but it's around,
or I don't believe it.
Or I don't
That's what I'm hearing from some people.
Yeah, so it's changing that
kind
of thing of must to want to. It's making that shift. So I don't want, you know, you must wear your safety glasses. Okay, so somebody will put them on while you're there. The chances are, if they don't want to wear them, the minute you've got them, they've come off. And I know there's lots of campaigns around there. And it's the shift of focus to, I want to wear those safety glasses because actually I recognize that my eyes are real important to me, and that there's a chance that if they get injured. So it's about moving that to the benefit side. And I think the why in all our communications about, and our motivations for making these kind of statements, a lot of the time those bits are missing. All we hear is you must, you have to, we're telling you to do this, get on with it. You don't have a choice, no dialogue. And that can really bring out that adaptive child, which is, you know, no, I won't, and you can't make me. So it's really getting to the root of helping people understand the why.
Okay.
And when you're asking them, opening that with what's going on for you, what are you experiencing right now? Because if you just say, oh, why aren't you following the rules, it'll still trigger. So it's taking it back to that open conversation so you can understand why.
Absolutely, thank you. Final question. Hitesh asks, what is the starting point? What is the starting point of starting the change in one's communication method? Is there a book or a course, something to help him guide improving his communication skills, I think is what he's trying to say.
Again, there's just tons. And I suppose the thing for me is, again, coming back to it's the awareness do I know how I'm communicating? Do I truly know? And is that based on, again, my beliefs, or is that based on some of the feedback that we mentioned last week, which equally is important to balance some of that out? I think there's some typical books that are go-tos for people. So Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Effective People is a really good book to really sort of think about, okay, actually, what is my approach generally around things? So that's, I'm just looking at my bookshelf now. So that's, I guess, one of mine. And yeah,
okay, that's brilliant. We are running out of time. I've just posted in the chat for everybody to see the 2 links for the final 2 sessions in this 4-part series. The other 2, this part and the one we did previously, will be on the IOSH YouTube channel. So if you want to register now, that'd be great. We will be publishing it on the usual channels and sharing it out through LinkedIn and through committee mailer for the next 2 sessions. Stuart, would you like to wind the session up, please?
I certainly will. Thank you so much from everybody for joining us, no matter where you are in the world. It's great to have you along, and you attending these webinars means so much to the Manchester branch. From a personal perspective, you can do a lot worse than look at Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a great starter book. I've always found that you can go back to that and learn a little bit about yourself. And those who are on Audible, you've got there's a couple of great listeners too. One's Surrounded by Idiots, which will certainly teach you about DISC. And the other one is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a great listen. And you can do that in a couple of hours on a motorway journey. Thank you again. Looking forward to part 3 already, and have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.